Ladies and gentlemen, we are in 2024 and chaos is the name of the game. We are going to talk about a lot of stuff today, folks. And when I say a lot of stuff, I mean a lot of stuff. You ought to see some of the stories that are coming out of the pipe. And I have to tell you this. It is a good thing that we are walking with the Lord and that we have perspective on our future because, ladies and gentlemen, the future looks terrible if you are not walking with God. It looks terrible if you don't have a relationship with God. But if you have a great relationship with God, then you will understand why it is a good thing when we recognize things as they sit, because the Bible not only told us about these things, but the Bible prepared us for these things that were coming. And we'll start off by me showing you a few things in the Bible that I think are important. But look at this, folks. We are going to talk about a lot of issues. How about this for a poll now? 36%. By the way, this, I want everybody to understand this. These are reports that are coming from mainstream media sources like CNN. Okay, think about this. 32% approve of the current president of the United States. And that number varies between 32 and 39. But even if you accepted the 39% number, it is the lowest approval rating that we have ever seen in the history of the United States of America. That's kind of crazy to think about it, but that is indeed the case. How about the fact that a recent poll, actually many polls, when people are asked about, let me just say the viability. How about that? How about we use that term of the current man in office? 36% of Americans do not even believe he should be there. And we'll just leave it at that, right? And you know what I mean when I say that? It's kind of an interesting thing when you think about that. And by the way, this was the Washington Post and the University of Maryland who actually said this, right? It's amazing. By the way, 29% who took the same poll was the number in 2021. So we can see the numbers are exponentially growing because they are recognizing the nature of evil that exists within the handlers of the current president of the United States and everything else that's going on. How about this for a second? HSBC, and we're going to talk about all of these. The HSBC outlook, right, supports the best of the worst argument. I'm going to explain what that means in a second because it is significant. Their 2024 outlook is more war, more commodity volatility. And that means something, and we'll talk about that for a second, because every leader around us seems to be pushing for war, including people running for the president of the United States in the Republican Party. And that's a mess. It's a real mess, especially some of the people running in the Republican Party, right? How about the Al-Qaeda? There's a section of Al-Qaeda now that is declaring open source jihad. And they are threatening the New York power grid. Now, you understand the New York power grid, of all places being affected, is the most substantial one to be affected, especially when we're looking at the stability and the viability of markets. Folks, what we're seeing right now and many of the things that are happening are absolutely crazy, and I think it's critically important for everybody to recognize things for what they are. We are undoubtedly in the last days. We are right now in a world of absolute and total insanity, and I want people to see things for what it is. None of this stuff, by the way, should surprise us for even a second. We shouldn't be looking at this stuff and thinking, wow, man, this really surprises me. This shocks me that this is the case. We know that it's the case, and we know, based on what the Bible tells us, that things are going to get this way more and more and more and worse and worse and worse and worse. And none of us should be surprised by it. I've said that 10 times now. It's a live show. I guess I can get away with saying something like that. Now, you know what I forgot to do? Let me do this very quickly. I forgot to tell people on social media that I am here live. So let me do that right now. That's kind of important. Oh, you guys, I've been doing this too many times lately while I'm on the air. Let me do this real quick. Okay, here we go. Hey, it's 2024. It's only been 4 days and chaos is ensuing in major ways. Click right here. We're going to talk about all of it. Click right here. We're live. I don't like to do that while I'm on the air, but sometimes you have to do that. You know, guys know how that goes. Anyway, so we've got a lot to talk about, and I want to start with a basic premise, and the premise is important for us to start with because if we don't start with the premise of what the scriptures tell us, then we're always going to end up in a very, very bad spot, which is why I think we must spend some time having a conversation about what the Bible says concerning the time in which we are living. So I'm going to grab my Bible, and I'm going to read something to you that I think is significant and important, especially related to the subject matter in which we are dealing. And I want everybody to understand that the Bible doesn't play around with stuff like this, right? The Bible has given us very clear and avid warnings concerning the time that we are in. And none of us should, like I said before, none of us should be taken, in a way where we're shocked by what we're reading or what we're hearing or what's actually going on. So let me read this to you because this is important. Right? And this is the Apostle Paul who is talking. And again, important stuff. He is talking to the church at Ephesus through Timothy, right? He's talking to Timothy here. And this is 2 Timothy, okay? And let's jump into let's go. How about we do this? Let's get into 1 Timothy chapter 4, and then we'll get into 2 Timothy for just a second, right? Let me read to you what this says. This is very, very important, and it's a good foundation for us to start this show on, okay? It says this. Oh, let me start this up here. Hold on one second. Get this rocking and rolling here. Okay, let me kill this. That's what happens when you manage all of this on your own. You know, it's really funny when I do shows with somebody else is in the room, everybody oftentimes, well, not everybody, a lot of people say, James, you're not really focused on the person that you're talking to. It's because I'm running the whole studio on my own. Anyway, let me read this to you. This is 1 Timothy chapter 4. This is very, very important, and it's a good foundation before we get into all of these stories because it helps to make biblical sense of what we're watching in the current moment and what we're actually seeing. It says this. It says, now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times, notice this, some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. There's a lot of deceiving spirits out there, a lot of doctrines of demons. Do you understand, guys, that now even the Olympic Association is actually saying that a man, if he chooses to transition to a woman, can actually participate in the sport of boxing against biological females. That is not a joke, by the way. Look, in order for men to sit down and believe that they can be having menstrual cycles, or in order for men to sit down and legitimately believe that they can get pregnant, not look like they're pregnant, but get pregnant, there has to be a doctrine of many demons that they are allowing themselves to be given to. And the Bible says that in the last days we would see that. Look, they're giving heeds to do what? Deceiving spirits. And there are a lot of deceiving spirits that are working full time right now to get the attention and the minds and the hearts of people who need to be led and guided by the truth. We are seeing this right now. So deceiving spirits, which leads to what? Doctrines of demons. Look, I think it's important that we talk about this for just a second, right? You do not believe a doctrine of demons. You don't get there. There's no way in the world that you become a person who communicates, believes, lives according to, walks according with the doctrines of demons unless you have allowed yourself to be given to spirits that are deceiving. And there are a lot of spirits that are deceiving right now that continue to be deceiving concerning a lot of things that are just blatantly untrue. Have you ever watched a White House press briefing? I was blown away to see, matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, the White House press secretary, who, by the way, look, she isn't even a good liar, okay? She's clearly there because she's black and a lesbian. She's not there because she's smart, because quite frankly, she's not even smart. With the former press secretary of the United States of America in the White House, I could actually make a reasonable argument that she's a smart woman, which makes her way worse because she's actually a devil. And she uses her brain to actually be a better deceiver. And everybody or anybody who knows who Jen Psaki is will be able to say that she's actually a relatively smart woman who is somewhat articulate. She doesn't sound as articulate when she starts getting cocky and snobby and all the other foolish things that come out of her mouth. But the reality of it was, she was actually a smart woman. And when she lied, she actually did it in a way that was somewhat sophisticated, right? But forget Jen Psaki for a moment. Let's talk about the current White House press secretary. Not only is she an absolutely ugly liar, right? But she isn't even intelligent. And I'm not saying that because I'm making an argument that's based on me insulting another person. I have no desire to insult her because her very existence in many ways demonstrates a series of insults that are oftentimes associated with the people that she claims to represent. She is not a good person. She is evil to the core, and she believes that she has the right to her position because of the intersectionality elements that exist within her. One or two immutable characteristics. She's female, she's black. Those are some big ones, right? But then it's the whole idea of being lesbian and all the other crazy stuff that goes with the grounds there. The reality of it is, she isn't intelligent. She doesn't have an iota of intelligence to be able to support the kind of job that she does. No class. We haven't even talked about that. But she actually is willing to stand in front of the country and tell the country the type of thing that falls in the same space as, well, Hunter Biden's a good, intelligent man. Okay, whatever. I'm not even going to get into that, right? He probably doesn't know a dang thing about lawyering and probably got through law school because of the connections that he had. And I'm not even going to go there. I'm just going to leave that be. We're not even going to fiddle with the Hunter Biden thing because you fiddle with that, then it starts just getting too insignificant and too inconsequential for the bigger picture that we're trying to discuss here. And the bigger picture that we're trying to discuss is the general spirit of deception that exists within our country and within our world, for that matter. So when we stop for a second to describe many of the things that we're seeing, even coming out of the White House with the current press secretary, you are looking at deceiving spirits. Make no mistake about it. That is exactly what you are observing. And whether or not you see it, it's very much there. Make no mistake, it is very much there. Now, here's the thing that we have to stop and talk about for just a second because it's important. Her latest lie centers around something that is so painfully obvious that not even the hardcore leftists are defending it. Even the hardcore leftists are pointing out that the border is a mess. We'll talk about the border in just a second because when we start getting into the briefing on international issues and our national security, you're going to be blown away to find out how much that lie is having an effect on the country right now. But she stands there and says, there's nothing really happening at the border. There's nothing to really be worried about. When we have had the largest surge of illegal aliens coming into our country in the history of our nation, and I think it's important to point that out. It's the largest in the history of our nation, the absolute largest, and yet she is walking around saying, oh, it's no big deal. And then, even for the person who does say, okay, well, we have a problem, their characterization of the problem is actually very broken and very misguided. Their characterization is, well, we've got people coming across the border that really want to make a better living for themselves and so on and so forth. And what they're actually doing technically isn't illegal because they're going down the road of seeking asylum. And within the context of the seeking of asylum from the nation that they are in, they are making themselves known or allowing themselves to be manifested at certain border points. And in doing so, we are taking them in and processing them as such. That is not the case. That is not happening. They are using it as a front for a loophole to be able to do what they do. And the reality of it is an overwhelming section of those people that are coming across the border are not even South American natives. They are not from Mexico. They are not from Venezuela. They are not from all of these other places. These are people that are military aged, more than capable, men that are coming out of China, coming out of many parts of the Middle East. If you think the word jihad is not significant, it's about to become significant for a lot of people in this country. Why? Because the average person in this country who tends to watch or tends to drive themselves in this belief, right, is giving themselves to deceiving spirits. Now, when you give yourself to a deceiving spirit, let me tell you what ends up happening. This is really incredible. This is really important, right? You end up developing doctrines of demons. You start believing the deception that continues to be communicated. You begin to develop a doctrine that is based on demonic essence. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now. People are preaching doctrines of demons. If you don't believe me, look at what's going on in the school boards. We're going to talk about that today as well. Take a look at the things that they're seeking to brainwash our children with. People ask me all the time, well, James, are you excited that you're going to send your children to a solid, good, healthy school district? I tell them the same thing every time. I'm not sending my children anywhere to be brainwashed. There is a deceiving spirit out there, and that deceiving spirit has created an absolute perfect factory for the doctrine of demons, which is being taught to kids everywhere. So stop messing with our kids, because the reality of it is your capitulation to these deceiving spirits. The idea that you continue to fall closer and closer and closer in line with the kind of evil that these people give themselves to is prime evidence of the fact that you know what? We'll leave it be. I'm not even going to go there, because if I start building that argument, we're going to lose time. Let me do this. And I'm glad that I looked at the clock. I just had to stop because I was going to build on something. Let me continue on with the passage. The passage here continues to say this: speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, communicating and commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. Folks, can I read another part of this to you? Let me read what I just read to you again. Look what it says. Having their own conscience seared with a hot iron. That's a heavy statement. So let me tell you what the pattern is. I guess I am going to have to go there. Goodness gracious. It's necessary. We have to go there. This has to be part of the discussion, because we're not going to be able to understand what we're seeing right now if we don't understand the picture in its totality. Okay? Watch this for just a second. You have deceiving spirits. That's very important. We got to point that out right off the bat. Those deceiving spirits are communicating a series of lies that are destructive to mankind, and mankind is embracing those deceiving spirits. When they embrace those deceiving spirits, you know what ends up happening? They begin to develop doctrines of demons. It's no longer just believing a simple lie and allowing it to take you off course, and somebody in society finding you and going, come on, you need to be reeled back in. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to change my mind. And then you go back and everything is all good. No, it actually is somebody who buys into the lie of the deceiving spirits that surround them. And then they engulf themselves so much in those deceiving spirits that they develop a doctrine of demons. And that doctrine is destructive. Ladies and gentlemen, that doctrine is a doctrine that is killing society faster than anything I've ever seen anything kill society. It's worse than virtually anything that I've seen in, my goodness, my whole lifetime. And it's continuing to happen. I'm going to mute this for just a second. So those deceiving spirits are being given way. By the way, they're manifesting themselves in social media. They're manifesting themselves in movies. They're manifesting themselves in all kinds of different contexts. All over the place. Very important that we establish this. And when those spirits are being heeded, when they are being listened to, when they are being welcomed in, by the way, I'm going to make a contention that I think is maybe a bit controversial. I don't think that drugs are the only thing anymore that welcome demonic spirits into a person's life. I actually think you can welcome a demonic spirit into your life by the open and blatant consumption of anything that will take away your sobriety. There's a lot of things that I could look at and say, yeah, that could take away your sobriety. The greatest conduit for anything that removes the sobriety of a man right now is the things that we're seeing in social media. In the TikToks of the world, and might I even dare to say even YouTubes and all the free video spaces that exist right now. We're going to get into a story, if we have the time, that talks about something that is happening right now with Facebook. Do you know that Facebook now is admitting that in their app, they're actually tracking your eye motions? There's a reason why I tell you people, when you use these apps, cover up the camera, or at least be aware of the fact that the camera is being activated. No joke. It's very, very easy to do. Very, very easy. I will lay a scenario down of something I heard. I'm either going to confirm or deny whether or not. Well, I'll just say that I knew a guy very, very well. Really, really well. Who every time he would call somebody, if that person didn't answer, and he had suspicions whether or not he was being blown off, he would figure out a way to call that person while activating their camera so that he could actually watch their reaction to their phone while the phone was ringing. If you don't think that kind of stuff is real, it's very real. So they're tracking your very eye motions. They want to know what you're looking at. They want to know what you're seeing. Do you understand the implications of how demonic that could be? Imagine if you are a person who has been struggling your whole life with drinking alcohol, right? And you open up a Facebook page and you happen to see a picture in your social media feed of a person that's holding a beer. And for a moment, you lose sight of the fact that you had this crazy addiction and you stare at that beer because it reminds you of the days that you used to live in. I know lots of people who talk about that kind of scenario. Heck, I've done it with my diet. Times where I'm like, I'm going to give up these types of sweets. And then you see a picture of somebody holding those sweets and you take a good look at that. You look really closely at it. You're like, oh man, this looks really, really good, right? Think about that for a second, right? So now they'll be able to see your eyes, see where your eyes are pointed to, what you're actually staring at. And they'll say, because of their AI, they'll say, oh, he's looking at that beer bottle. You know what? Let's throw up a bunch of beer ads. Or he's looking at that candy. Oh man, let's throw up all these candy videos. And then they see how you react to those ads or those videos. And when they can tell that you are interested in it, then you start getting bombarded. Why? Because all they care about is making money. They don't care about your soul. They don't care about the effects that it's going to have on you and your family. They don't care about the fact that they're stumbling you from a lifelong condition. They don't care about any of that stuff. That's exactly where it's going right now. That's exactly where it's going. By the way, advertisers are spending big money, big money for the ability to be able to do this. Big, big money. That's the world in which we're living, folks. So, this is what happens. You've got deceiving spirits. The deceiving spirits come, they overwhelm the heart and the mind of the person. And that person, instead of shunning those evil, deceiving spirits, they embrace the deception, and now they create doctrines of demons. Right? I mean, you can see the progression in society today. Years and years ago, you had somebody come up to you and say, hey, you know, I've been a man my whole life, and I really believe that there's a woman inside of me. This is what we would do. We would send them to the psychologist. They would be diagnosed with some form of mental illness. And then what would end up happening is we would deploy a series of resources that would help the person through the struggles that they were having with respect to who they were. Right? Very simple. By the way, if you think that that's an obscene or a derogatory way of looking at things, think about raising a child. I have a precious, precious group of children that I get to call, because of God's grace, my own. And in their young ages, all of tender age, if one of them came to me and said, I'm Superman and I can fly, and I actually say, you're right, honey, you can fly, and then I let that girl or that boy get on top of a building and jump off the building because I've led them to believe that they're Superman and they can actually fly, then in essence, I will be a terrible father, because I will allow them to drive themselves into their own death. Their very delusional state has allowed them to develop an understanding of a variable that doesn't exist to be true, and in allowing them to accept that truth and further that delusion, they will end up killing themselves. No good father or mother will allow that to happen. Not a single one. And by the way, let me make myself very, very clear. Every single child at one point or another struggles with things like even the sex issue, or what some people might term as gender. Gender is, in my opinion, a term that should be associated with in essence, a literary object as opposed to a function of sex. Sex, there's only one mechanic involved. It's XX or XY. It's really simple, right? But think about that for a second. If I allowed my kid to be given to that delusion, then my kid would destroy their lives. Or how about the many, many stories, healthy stories of young men, babies, in their, 2, 3 years old. They look at the clothes that they wear every single day and wonder why they can't wear a dress like their sister. So they want to mess around with the idea of wearing a dress. There's a strong father in that situation who'll say, no, son, we don't do that. You're a boy. Boys don't wear dresses. That's just the way it goes. Now imagine if you have a father who is a complete coward, who is not worthy of the title of father, who tells his son, well, if you want to experiment, honey, go ahead. Let's just you know what you're going to do? By the time that child is 5 years old, you are going to completely destroy their minds and their hearts, because you are going to take advantage and exploit a genuine curiosity that comes from them simply observing and processing information into a doctrine of demons, because you allowed the deception to be embraced. When did the deception came in? The deception came in when you chose to believe the lie, and the doctrine of demons came in when you chose to actually formulate a position for why you accept that deception. That's how it works. Once the doctrine of demons come in, once you begin to allow yourself to capitulate to that type of doctrine, you know what begins to happen? You begin to allow your conscience to be seared. In other words, when the Spirit of God begins to convict you and you begin to experience God's voice speaking to you directly and actually telling you, hey, no, this isn't good, or telling you, hey, be careful, or saying, hey, open up your eyes, recognize that the direction you're going in is wrong. When the Spirit of God begins to speak to you, and you've given yourself to deception, the Spirit of these, wicked, deceptive lies, and then you begin to build doctrines of demons based on the deception that you've allowed yourself to be given to, you will now have a seared conscience. In other words, you will not respond to the conviction of the Holy Spirit. The conviction of the Holy Spirit will become a matter of null to you. You will not listen to the Holy Spirit. And then as a result, what are you going to do? You're going to destroy your life. That is the very problem that we are seeing right now. That is the very thing that we are witnessing. We know this. The Apostle Paul wasn't messing around. Then in the second letter that he writes to Timothy, look what he says in chapter 3 of the second letter that he writes to Timothy. And these words are super, super important. Look what he says. But know this. This is verse 1 of chapter 3 of 2 Timothy. But know this, that in the last days, look at this, perilous times will come. Now I'm going to later on spend some time about the description of what perilous times mean and how Paul actually expounds upon this. But he says it. He makes it very clear. In the last days, perilous times will come. And folks, we are undoubtedly in the midst of perilous times. Why? Because we're in the last days. Some of you might say, James, we're in the last days. So does that mean that the church is going to get raptured in 5 hours? Does that mean the church is going to get raptured in 5 days? Okay, you're not going to see me make ridiculous assertions as into when the church is going to get raptured like some crazy nuts have done. We've even had people that claim to be credible that told us that the rapture was going to happen last year. Some people told us that the rapture would end up happening before September the 25th. We had other people tell us, one person specifically built a whole doctrine on the rapture taking place on September the 19th based on a really ugly interpretation of a vital passage in Scripture that did not imply anything of a sort. Those times have come and gone. The 19th came and went of September. September the 25th came and went. All the other dates that people were predicting leading into the end of the year, they came and they went. And the church has not been raptured yet. But the problem is this. The problem is there's a lot of deception going on right now concerning the times that we're in. There's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of lying going on, and there's a lot of sensationalism going on. And when you begin to combine all of those things, you begin to see the kind of ugly things that we are actually watching right now in the moment, and it is getting absolutely darker. By the way, I want to say this really quickly before I forget, and it is important for me to acknowledge this. Those of you guys that are giving on Rumble and YouTube, you guys are absolutely amazing, and I promise you I will acknowledge you before the broadcast ends. So let's look at some of these reports. Knowing what we know, knowing what the Bible says about what we should expect, and knowing what we understand to be, this is amazing. Amazing, 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 amazing when you look at this. Okay, let me read this to you. HBSC Outlook supports best of the worst argument. We'll get into that discussion, by the way, for just a second. One of the major trends last year among big banks was that the U.S. economic weakness and or recession would hurt the global economy and somewhat ironically push foreign investors into U.S. assets and the U.S. dollar. Boy, is that wrong. Right? especially considering the fact that you cannot deploy the best of the worst argument when what we call the best of the worst is actually becoming the promulgator of everything that is becoming worse, which means what we would call the best of the worst is actually becoming the worst of the worst. We are moving in a direction of a cashless society, and anybody that tells you anything other than that probably isn't paying attention. Let me just put it that way. Look at what HSBC says. By the way, they're a multinational bank. This is very important. I'm going to read the quote. They say, if that weakness, they're talking about the economic weakness, right? If that economic weakness becomes more acute, we believe it could create, notice this, much more challenging conditions for risk appetite and global growth momentum that would actually start to support the USD through its cyclical status. So here's what people are saying. People are saying that as things get crazier, this is what the bank is saying, there could be a level of risk aversion that begins to grow where people do not want to necessarily step into difficult decisions. And somehow, some way, they think that will magically translate into people assuming that the United States dollar is the most stable of all of the dollars that exist, which right now, that may be the case, but it's only for a short period of time. Think about this for a second. Here's why this is important, and I want people to understand this. It doesn't matter how bad the conditions can get in 2024 and 25. The global financial crisis that exists among us, right, is going to produce a collapse, not only in United States real estate, right, but it's going to create corporate bond failures. It's going to create bank failures. It is actually going to create a condition amongst the world that represents an equalization of what we would call the liquidation function or the liquid asset variable. How about I put it that way, right? That drives people into a deeper state of panic, and that panic will, in essence, destroy the momentum of cash. It will. I don't care what anybody says. I want people to understand that the direction that the United States of America is going in right now is indicative of the direction that the rest of the world will eventually be going in. The value of our very dollar is dying. It's dying a terrible death. And this isn't like the Nixon days, where we were beginning to see a certain level of instability in international markets. And that instability specifically with what was beginning to be observed in Japan and some of the beginnings of what we were beginning to see with a lot of the economic instability or destabilization of the region, not only in Asia, but in partially North Africa and, of course, in Europe. That drove Nixon to want to make sure that the gold-backed currency that existed would actually go bye-bye, because he needed the ability to take advantage of the destabilization that was happening in the rest of the dollars around the world to increase the value of the United States dollar. And the only way that he could do that quickly is by removing the association with gold backing the United States currency into a fiat currency. Now, for some people, that might seem a little bit confusing, but let me explain what I mean when I say that. When your dollar is valued based on the amount of gold that you have to back up what you say the value of your dollar is, that's great because the value of your dollar can't really drop unless the value of gold drops, and the value of gold typically will not drop substantially. The deltas in the way that the ebb and flow of gold actually goes are so limited that you can't really say anything. In other words, gold doesn't really move much. And the only time it moves in a substantial way is when you see just insane economic crisis take place, and then people run to gold because they want to be able to have something substantive that will actually back whatever value that they think they have in the current currency that's in their pocket. So gold doesn't move much. And the reason why it's a good idea to have your dollar being backed by gold is because that preserves the value of your dollar. That means the piece of paper that you're holding actually means something, because for every dollar that you have, there are ounces of gold that can actually back the dollar that you're putting in front of somebody. Now, that's a wonderful thing. But here's the problem with that if you're a United States president trying to increase the value of your dollar on the international stage. The problem with that is, if you expect the value of your dollar to increase, it will not, because the value can only be limited by the value of the gold that backs it. So if he removes the gold from the function of it backing the dollar, then the dollar can now go through the roof. The value of that dollar is no longer limited by the value of gold that backs it, and it can go through the roof. Now, that's great, and it might work for probably even, let's just say you ride a massive big old ride and you avoid the swinging chandelier of the economic disparities that exist within global communities that are beginning to fall apart. Let's just say you avoid all of that stuff. You maybe have 20 years of high-end currency being associated, 20 years of your fiat currency, which, by the way, fiat currency means that there's no backing. In essence, it's a declaration that's made, and the determinations to validate those declarations with respect to the value of particular currencies, oftentimes based on things like GDP and all kinds of other things, which credit ratings and so on and so forth. So the liquidity variable changes substantially when the deltas change, when you don't have gold backing the dollar. Now, I'm going somewhere with this, and I hope you guys will understand this. Because Nixon did that, it increased the value of the dollar substantially. A very temporary level. But it did increase the value of the dollar because Nixon was taking advantage of the destruction of world currencies, understanding that that would drive up the value of the US dollar if the gold backing was removed, because the gold backing, which protected the value of the dollar from inflation destroying it, was the same thing that was holding it back from skyrocketing in comparison to other currencies that were devaluing across the world. That was at least his theory. By the way, I would just even disagree with that theory, because I think that, yes, it does protect a little bit of the ebb and flow. But if you backed your dollar with gold, you also help yourself do lots of other things. You prevent radical rates of inflation from taking place because you are not doing a thing called quantitative easing, which means you're not printing money every day. Which, by the way, during this current administration, we have printed more dollars in this current administration. You take the last year of the previous administration, and you take all the years of this current administration, and you take all the dollars that were printed during that time, and it's more money that has been printed in the history of the United States. That's no joke. Not lying. So the dollar that you had that used to be able to buy a certain amount of things no longer is able to buy any of that. Quite frankly, if you had $100,000 in the bank in 2020, that $100,000 now has the buying power of close to $40,000. Not according to the current GDP indexes that people use in order to determine whether or not real inflation is taking place, because those indexes have been heavily modified by the president and by the White House. Which I don't even know if they have the legal authority to do it, but they've done it. I think they did it through executive order. And more and more people are not questioning the fiat that oftentimes comes with executive ability, but that's a whole different discussion to have at a different time. So the point is, we have watched tremendous failure begin to ensue globally. But when the United States currency, based on its fiat established value, it's no longer based on gold backing, begins to go in the direction that it's going, it will take the rest of the world with it. Whether or not anybody wants to say anything about that. Now, the problem is if we know that that's the case and we know that the dollar is weakening as we speak, I do not think that there will be a flood of liquidity that gets put into the economy of the United States because of the fear people have about the backing of a particular currency. Let me explain what I mean when I say this. You have people all over Europe, you have people all over Africa, you have people all over Asia that begin to see the devaluing of their currency and they panic. So what do? They pull it out of their banks, or they start doing wire transfers, or they start doing whatever they want, and they drop it in the U.S. economy. Even though the U.S. economy is in bad shape, it's the best of the worst. The idea here behind them putting that money into the U.S. economy is that they will get the biggest bang for their buck because of the resiliency that we have seen over the years of the United States economy. The problem is what we call the resiliency of the United States economy is really not a resiliency. It is basically, in essence, a big, massive theater. At least it has been that way for the last, probably, I would say, 8 years. And that's the problem. Matter of fact, this is the reason why the former president was so upset about the Fed wanting to raise the interest rate at certain points, because the Fed correctly recognized that the level of increase within the GDP of not even just the national GDP, but local GDPs all over the place, which in certain communities were skyrocketing. For example, GDP in Los Angeles was going through the roof. And yes, they do detect local GDP numbers, believe it or not. okay? It's a different index. It's called a different name, but in essence, they use the same type of tools to be able to develop the kind of spending that's happening and what kind of product is being produced, the demand for that product, and how much that demand is driving the price of certain items. Okay? The bottom line is this: no matter how you cut it, you're not going to be able to fix the downward spiral direction that the whole world's economy is going into. Think of it like this. You've got two planes that are going in a nosedive. You've got one plane that's going in a rapid nosedive, way faster than the other plane. And the other plane, although it's going in a nosedive, is leveling out and then going in a nosedive, leveling out and going in a nosedive, leveling out and going in a nosedive. They're both eventually going to go down. They're both eventually going to crash. Okay? What they're trying to do right now is they're trying to lengthen the time associated for when they're going to crash with the plane. Right? They're trying to just buy more time. Folks, this is the conundrum that we're in right now when we start looking at the idea of evaluating what's happening domestically. So HSBC makes this statement. Then look at this. And I haven't even gotten close to going into some of the crazy stories that we're seeing for 2024. Their outlook, HSBC's outlook, based on what they see happening in economically based trends, are basically saying we're going to see more war, and with more war, we're going to see more volatility with commodities. Not stock volatility, commodity volatility. Now, why is that important? That's important because when you begin to see extreme volatility in commodities, not standard deltas that are associated with seasons. Like, for example, coffee, which happens to be a commodity, will increase in its value substantially as you enter into the colder months of the season. As a matter of fact, in summer, you'll actually see the commodity futures increase for commodities like coffee as you are beginning to anticipate entering into a season where there's colder weather. Likewise, there are certain commodities that drop based on certain seasonal trends. But when you begin to see trends begin to take place that are completely unaffected by the seasons in the trading of commodities, because what's affecting it is war, then things begin to change. Why? When people go to war, folks, people don't place a premium on what we would normally look at or refer to as a commodity so much as they're placing a premium on trying to be able to restabilize things that have been destroyed by the current regime entering into a time of brutality. So we have to understand what's going on. We're going into a very, very difficult situation. And by the way, while all of that is going on, I should say this right now because this is very important. HSBC actually says that we are going to enter into, ready for this? This is their own quote, a new multipolar world, right? And a more fragmented global order, which results in the end of hyperglobalization. That's what they're saying, right? Which will lead to more resource nationalism, such as bans on certain commodity exports, and more spending on defense and security and higher structural inflation. And by the way, they're not wrong about that. But the one thing that they are missing in this is the amount of increase and substantial deltas begin to shoot through the rocket in order to buy and fund the cost of war, the harder the general economy will suffer. And when the general economy begins to suffer, the globalization or the fragmentation of the globalization movement that we've been seeing right now will only exist for one purpose and one purpose only: the restructuring of the New World Order. That's what's going to happen. It's going to restructure itself. And we know exactly how that's going to happen. 10 nations give their power to one person. I think that's what's happening. We talked about this. This is interesting. AQAP. For those of you who don't know what that refers to, it's Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They are threatening open source jihad. That's what they're doing, right? They released a video promoting open source jihad and threatened attacks against New York's power grid, their subway system, and commercial aircraft. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if all of those things were affected all at once? Or let's just even say next to one another. sequentially. It would be an absolute, it would just be a disaster. It would be crazy, but that's what they're looking to do, right? How about this? Japanese mega bank. You all know who they are, MUFG. They detailed their geopolitical risk scenarios for 2024, which, by the way, they have to do this. If you really want to get a good idea of where you think the rest of the world is going and their mindset about where things are going and how they're preparing, you need to look at the risk aversion assessments that every bank throws out, any major bank. And they'll give you lots and lots of information that's valuable, and it's based on really strong analysis because they're trying to, very much working hard to protect their assets. Right? So they detailed their geopolitical risk scenarios for 2024, ranging from de-escalation of the Israeli-Hamas war to a Middle East regional conflagration. By the way, the Mid East regional conflagration, if that happens the way that they're outlining it for it to happen, you are looking at the beginning of the 10-nation confederation. I'm telling you this right now. So they predict a 20% chance of a de-escalating Israel-Hamas war and a 55% chance of the war remaining between Israel and Hamas and a 25% chance of a wider Middle East conflict. I bet you that 25% chance of a wider Middle East conflict is probably going to be less than that because the reality of it is they're going to want to make peace and they're going to want to do it very quickly. And they're going to recognize that they're not going to do it with the Palestinians, right? They say that the Middle East would send Brent crude oil up to $100 per barrel, gold to $2,400 per ounce, and the European Union natural gas prices, notice this, up 70% and reignite world inflation. That's what they're saying is going to happen. If it happens, folks, I'm going to just tell you this right now. We are going to see 2024 as being a year where we are going to watch the disappearance of cash, right? How about Hong Kong PLA held full-scale combat drill to ring in 2024? I don't even have the time to get into the implications of why that's so significant. That in and of itself is a significant one, right? How about this? The Chinese, they announced this. They announced its Southern Theater Command would be sending naval and air forces, those are their own words, on a patrol of the South China Sea. That's, by the way, very, very important because it relates to everything that deals with the Philippines. It affects a lot of different variables, right? The Armed Forces of the Philippines announced its second joint patrol of the West Philippine Sea, as they refer to SCS, with the United States. Both patrols are taking place on a Wednesday and Thursday and may coincide with the resupply mission. Think about the significance of what that could end up meaning. Could it mean that what's happening right now is we are watching a convergence of a bunch of nations seeking to protect assets in Taiwan? I don't know. But what I do know is that foreign policy around the world is about to change. How about this one? This one probably bothers me the most of all of the headlines. African ports on Red Sea reroutes among world's worst. Think about that story. South African ports that are taking on rerouted Red Sea traffic are among the worst performing ports in the world, according to the World Bank's Containers Port of Performance Index. That's a CPPI. The CPPI is a reliability index based on whether ports can receive ships at their scheduled times and constantly cycle them through the allotted time. Look at this. There are 3 ports. The ports of Durban, Nakuru, and Cape Town are in the bottom 10 of the 348 assessed ports. And those are going to be the busiest. Port Elizabeth is the only port that is among some of the highest performing ports, right? And only 2 ports in sub-Saharan Africa are in the top half of that report. That matters because if we see poor performance by these midway stops where all kinds of refueling and all kinds of other things are going to happen, then we are going to actually see ships cycle themselves in a place where they are just completely, and when I say completely, I mean completely disabled. So for you, that means your Amazon shipments are going to be, coming in way slower, or whatever purchases you're making online. But the more significant variable that exists there is we are going to end up seeing a massive crash in the economy, because if demand increases, but supply is gone because we can't deliver that supply, we're going to create a bigger problem for ourselves. Folks, that is what is happening right now. I need people to understand what's taking place. Look, and we haven't even begun to talk about some of the other things that I wanted to have a conversation about. Like we haven't even begun to talk about what's going on in Israel. Right? And that's something that I've been talking about a lot, right? That's been a conversation we've just been having every single day, and it's been something we've been talking about. When you begin to see the outlook, you begin to see all of the things that are going on, it makes for a very, very difficult situation in the minds of a lot of people who have no hope, right? But we have hope, don't we? We have hope because we have Christ. We have hope because not only do we have Christ, but we have hope because the Lord told us in the Bible that we would see things like this happening, right? Now, it didn't tell us that these exact stories would happen the way that they happen. But it did warn us that we would see a world where all of this would become the standard, where all of this, in essence, would become the general norm. And that should not come as a surprise to any of us. I said that in the beginning, and I said it a million times, and I'll say it again. None of this should surprise us. Will 2024 be the year of adamant chaos? You bet it will be. It's going to be the year of the type of chaos that we've never seen before. I mean, literally. And I'm not trying to make people panic, and I'm not trying to get people to be all worried and, all that kind of stuff. I'm just telling you right now, it's not going to be a good season. It's not going to be an easy season for a lot of people. It just isn't. But it's the nature of the beast. It's where we are right now. It's where things are going. So, we've gone for a little bit longer than I needed to, or than I wanted to. I actually always want to go long, but longer than we needed to. So we are going to go over to locals, and we're going to take some questions. Again, I'll take any question that you ask. We'll do that, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. By the way, we are going to very soon do a live stream that we anticipate lasting for a couple of hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours, believe it or not. And in that live stream, we're just going to go for it. We're gonna answer every question that we can. We're gonna go out of our way to make sure that you guys basically get as much as you can get out of us in that time, considering the time that we're in. There's just a lot of stuff that we're going to do that we're pretty excited about. So, that's coming. That time is coming, and we'll kind of keep you guys up to speed on when that's actually going to happen. And I'm kind of looking forward to that. So, anyway, hold on a second. Let me see if I can get this done here. Did we get that? Yeah, we sure did. Okay. I got that message pinned. So it's there. You guys have it. You can, click on to locals and be a part of that. Let me do this really quickly, because I think it's important. You guys that have contributed on locals or on YouTube, thank you guys. And I just wanted to acknowledge you guys for just a second. Thank you, by the way, for your super chats and your super stickers. They're not only amazingly generous, but they're so helpful to us in what we're seeking to do. So Brad Brunn, you say, Brother James, thank you for sharing the truth from God's word. I know these are I know there are some who complain there is too much gloom and doom here. If that is how you feel, there's always Lakewood Church with Joel Holstein. That's funny. Dean says, happy birthday to C Blessed. Oh, I didn't know it was your birthday. Happy birthday. Russ, thank you so much. Asset Ministries, you say happy birthday, C Bless. Everyone should check out Val Halloran's music. What a blessed songwriter. Didn't know that Val was even a songwriter. That's awesome. DL Rich, thank you for sharing the truth as always. Scary to know our current president said he's running again in 2024. I know. I'm telling you, he's not going to make it to that. I don't think they're going to let him. Freddie Ramirez, thank you so much. And Mr. Red, thank you. You guys are awesome. All right, guys, what we're going to do is we are going to switch over to locals in a few minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, just a small one, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, love you guys. God bless you. Stay tuned. There's a lot of interesting stuff we've got coming your way. By the way, for those of you that did not see it, I am reposting the prophecy update that I did on my other channel. We're modifying it a little bit to make it a little bit more palatable as a video for our Friday release. We're looking forward to that. And so if you guys are interested in it, it's coming your way Friday. That'd be tomorrow. All right. So we love you guys. God bless you. Keep fighting the good fight.